So, continuation or bastardization, exposing the fallacy of the African origins of. There's been a recent explosion of research espousing the African origins of a myriad of things. There's a recent art exhibit going on right now as we speak called The Afrikan Origins of an American Art. Really? Okay. Yeah. I have personally participated in a few lectures entitled The African Origins of Christianity. You've got folks talking about the African origins of Islam. I'm sure if we dig hard enough, there'll be somebody doing the African origins of makeup, the African origins of the fart. I mean, you name it, someone somewhere is searching for its African origins. Now, this area of research first started nobly and distinguishedly by brave African men and women researchers who were who wanted to expose historical and cultural lies told by caucasoids and caucasoid-light, or their followers, to instill confidence, in an African populace about African reality. J.A. Rogers, of course, Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, John G. Jackson, all those greats from the 50s and 60s. They wrote those books for a particular purpose. We've gotten off of that purpose. Now, African origins of is a buzzword by caucasoids to feign diverse cultural acceptance when complete cultural alienation of all non-caucasoids is their true goal. African origins of is also a buzz phrase for black folks who do not want to have anything to do with Africa, but who want to be accepted by the ever-increasing group of those who are indeed re-Africanizing. Before the 1980s, you didn't have too many black groups who were non-African-centered claiming Africa in any of their rhetoric. With the Afrocentricity knowledge explosion of that era, those aforementioned groups were caught off guard and started losing membership and credibility. So instead of jettisoning those failed ideologies, they half read books, they half listened to lectures, they extracted disjointed fragments of African information, grafted it onto their moribund ideology, and sustained themselves with this now current African origins of folly. The biggest, most glaring problem with this African origins of aberration is how traditional and classical Africa did X, whatever X is, whatever it is, spirituality or education or politics, African origins of all that, how traditional and classical Africa did those things is largely undealt with and or only superficially dealt with. And practically all these ideas touted as African origins of, there is a complete 100% bastardization of said African origins. Now, when one examines the present day X, again, whatever X is, today we're talking about the spiritual piece, the religion piece, Christianity. In comparison to the falsely grafted Africa, Africa is not present. It becomes inconsequential if Africans started something, if its continuation is not even a close proximity to what they started. Let me repeat that. It becomes inconsequential if African people started something, if its continuation is not even a close proximity to what they started. There are no African origins of Christianity. Now, before you flood the chats and before you flood the phone calls, hear me out. Stealing our images does not mean our exact meanings came with them. Stealing foundational concepts does not mean caucasoids practiced, lived, understood those concepts the exact or approximate ways that we Africans did. When this is fully understood, then one has to take a step back when faced with an African origins of idea. You got to ask, what are they really talking about? Are they just trying to give themselves some type of validity by mouthing Africa, but the Afrikan worldview is not present in what they're falsely comparing Africa to? So now, for anyone who'd like a copy of this, what I'm about to read from, like I said last week, I do a news journal called Afrikan World Analysis. And hopefully January 2011, it'll have the whole thing online. And yes, there will be a small fee for it. But for folks who want a copy of this particular one, issue 28, I'll be reading a piece from On the Road to Complete African Ideational Sovereignty, an examination of the African way with a special emphasis on African cosmology. What I did in this piece is there are a few works out there who have went at great lengths attempting to put together what the Afrikan worldview is, what the African way is, for those who know about 2000 season. And so to save folks the trouble of getting all those books, Dr. Jot's book, Dr. Cambone's books, Sankofa Movement, and some other books, I tried to put all of it in one piece. And so it's a nice small journal. If you hit me up in the chat room or hit me up at Kamal301@yahoo.com, I'll send you an electronic version of it. And there's a few folks in the chat room who do already have this particular issue. I have a small section talking about what the African way is, because we have to understand that. There's this one person, I don't know if I want to even mention his name to give him any play, but he feels that anything that an African person does is African. Anything that a black person does is African. So it doesn't make a difference what worldview it's coming from. And unfortunately, a lot of people follow that non-logic. So simply put, the African way are those static aspects of the entirety of traditional pre-colonial Africa. Each new generation, being rooted in those deeply seated aspects, molds the present-day realities around those time-tested, proven-to-work static elements and forges their future. Now, Edward Wilmot Blyden was probably the first person possible to articulate the African way. He labeled it the African personality. And how he stated it, each race is endowed with peculiar talents. In the music of the universe, each shall give a different sound, but necessary to the grand symphony. So those peculiar talents are our African way. Even in his work, African Life and Customs, he paved the way of beginning to try to put those things together. And there have been a few good scholars and researchers who have corrected a few mistakes he made, but then also expanded on what he's done. Another brother that gives a good definition of the African way is Kofi Dompierre in his book Polyrhythmicity. And here he says, there are several minimal fundamental propositions regarding African philosophical positions about nature, man, and their relationship with one another. These minimal fundamental propositions are abstracted from the general family of the African cultural milieu and principles of African traditions, from classical antiquity to the present. And then lastly, Dr. Kobe Cambone, in his masterwork, African Personality in America, he defines the African way as the collective shared biopsychological condition that is fundamental to the nature of African people. It refers to the deeply rooted cognitive emotional style and a network or configuration of behaviors that, particularly under natural conditions, conditions where alien influences are absent, or generally under all other conditions, those behaviors can be observed or plausibly inferred in African people wherever they are found to exist on the planet. So those are just some quick general definitions of what the African way is. We can get into more specifics as far as we hear about the two-cradle theory that folks have ascribed to Baba Diop, where the southern cradle, us, you have abundance of vital resources, more sedentary and agricultural-based, xenophilia, social collectivism, idea of peace, justice, goodness, and optimism. Those things would be a few things listed under the African way, the Afrikan worldview. Survival of the group, harmony with nature, spiritualism, things like that. Now, we have to come from that beginning when we're talking about African origins of Christianity. We have to come from our Afrikan worldview base when dealing with this other system. Deep and profound acknowledgement and caretaking of one's ancestors, oracles and divination, male, female, cosmological parity. These are a few key concepts within practically all classical and traditional African spiritual systems. Christianity, however, disavows one's ancestors, disavows oracular knowledge, and disavows all female energy in its larger understanding of the universe. So unless one is using the Afrikan origins of to show how Christianity has dramatically de-evolved, how the African system, has drastically de-evolved to its present state, if you're not doing that, but you're claiming African origins of, either it's bad scholarship or just disingenuousness. The Madonna and child statues, white, black, blue, green, or magenta, have no African origins in the deep sense if said worshippers are not dealing with Aset, Heru, and how our classical African ancestors dealt with that concept. Image theft does not translate to meaning theft. Now let me see if this analogy works. If someone special gives you a pen on your birthday, one of those expensive pens, and it's a person that you really, really like, they give you this pen on your birthday. It has sentimental attachment and a special meaning in it for you. If I come along and steal that pen, those sentiments and that special meaning, for me, doesn't come along with it. I just have your writing utensil. Now, I hope that analogy was clear, because just because caucasoid stole an image, a concept, a representation from us, does not automatically translate into our meanings came with them. Caucasoid thoughts, thinking, worldview, and asili taints and corrupts all things they touch, especially meanings they never fully understood in the first place.